I first saw A Course in Miracles on someone's coffee table, and I suppose 1977, something like that. And I read the introduction. And the introduction is a kind of astonishing thing. I have it here. The introduction says, "This is a Course in Miracles. It is a required course. Only the time you take it is voluntary. Free will does not mean that you can establish the curriculum. It means only that you can elect what you want to take at a given time. The Course does not aim at teaching the meaning of love, for that is beyond what can be taught. It does aim, however, at removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is your natural inheritance. The opposite of love is fear, but what is all-encompassing can have no opposite. This course can therefore be summed up very simply in this way. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God." I saw that, I read it, and I thought that was the most amazing piece of writing. To pick up a book and have the book tell you it's a required course. I mean, you go, well, who wrote it? What is it? Who is telling me that this book is a required course? I was so intrigued by that.
I read one page, and in that one page of reading it, I heard for the first time in a little inner voice that said, "Physician, heal thyself. This is your way home." And I had the most amazing experience of feeling a sense of oneness with the whole world, that there was absolutely no separation, that there was only love, and a real feeling that I was to be of service to God. My whole life would be changed, and it would be a life of giving and a life of being of service. I really couldn't understand that, but it was a very deep, penetrating feeling. And I became a student of the Course, fought it all the way, couldn't deal with the thickness of the Course, let alone its Christian terminology. And yet there was something about the Course that just compelled me to go on.
The spiritual genesis of the international bestseller, A Course in Miracles, is both extraordinary and inspiring. The self-study three-book course was dictated by an inner voice, and it has profoundly changed the lives of countless people the world over. Spread mainly by word of mouth, its principles have thus far been known only to its students. But now, its transformational teachings of love, forgiveness, inner peace, and wisdom will be explored. Communicating the correct meaning of the Course rests largely with Dr. Kenneth Wapnick, president of the Foundation for A Course in Miracles. In a recent television interview, he gave an enlightening overview of the Course.
It's a form of spiritual psychotherapy that comes to us in a Christian context. As you mentioned at the beginning, its author is Jesus. But it's a Christianity that has practically nothing to do with the traditional teachings of 2,000 years. It certainly has nothing to do with the Jesus of the Bible. Its principal message is forgiveness, and that the way that we remember our identity as God's children and realize that in His eyes we are all one is to forgive each other. It basically is a self-study course in the sense that you don't need anyone outside. The teacher or the guru, as it were, would be Jesus or the Holy Spirit, who guides us day by day. Our lives in this world are seen as a classroom, basically, in which we learn the Holy Spirit's lessons of forgiveness. And again, as I mentioned, it's by undoing all of our feelings of inadequacy, our feelings of guilt, our anxieties, which is what forgiveness brings about, that the love of God, which is present in all of us, is allowed to be remembered.
There is a massive effort going on in this society, and I think throughout the world, to retrieve some lost part of ourselves. And A Course in Miracles is part of that effort.
A Course in Miracles contains a whole philosophy for living in our times. The Course was born when an inner voice spoke to Dr. Helen Schuckman in 1965 while she was working at Columbia University. Helen was a highly respected research psychologist and associate professor who worked with Dr. William Thetford, a professor of medical psychology at the prestigious Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons. In her unpublished autobiography, Helen, who died on February 9, 1981, described her reactions to her job and the highly stressful situations that existed there.
I was a psychologist, educator, conservative in theory and atheistic in belief. I was working in a prestigious and highly academic setting, and the job was ghastly at first. The hospital didn't provide space for our projects, and when we were finally housed in the new research building, it was the most difficult situation of my professional life. The work was oppressive and carried out in an atmosphere of suspicion and competitiveness, and interpersonal harmony was depressingly lacking. Then something happened that triggered a chain of events I could never have predicted.
We had worked together for a number of years, actually from 1958 until the summer of 1965, with a good deal of improvement in terms of the organization of the psychology department at the hospital, but we weren't really at peace. And one day I gave Helen a little speech. This was in June of 1965 before we were going to a meeting. Essentially what I said is, there must be a better way of living and working in the world, of handling our personal and professional relationships and problems, and I'm determined to find it. This was kind of a long speech for me, and I remember feeling at the end of this that Helen probably was going to laugh, but to my amazement, quite the contrary. She said, "You're absolutely right, Bill. We'll find this other way together." And that was the beginning of a joint commitment which the two of us made. The summer of 1965 was an extraordinary summer for both Helen and me in a number of ways. Helen began to have a great deal of what you might call heightened visual imagery or dream sequences. She began to experience this with considerable clarity, and I suggested that she write down these experiences as they occurred, because they seemed to have something they were saying something very important, even though we didn't know exactly what that was. One of those sequences involved being in a boat.
The boat was moving slowly but easily along a very straight little canal. There was just enough breeze to help the boat along. I wonder if there is buried treasure here, I thought to myself dreamily. I shouldn't be surprised if there were. Then I noticed a long pole with a large hook on the end lying on the bottom of the boat. Just the thing, I thought, dropping the hook into the water and reaching the pole down as far as I could. The hook caught something heavy and I raised it with difficulty. It was an ancient treasure chest, the wood worn from the water and the bottom covered with seaweed. There was nothing in the chest but a large black book like the spring binders used for holding manuscripts or papers together. On the spine, one word was written in gold. The word was Esculapius. The word was familiar, but I could not remember what it meant. When I looked it up, I found that it was the name of the Greek god of healing. I saw the same book once more a few nights later. This time, there was a string of pearls around it. This psychic phase ended abruptly with a particularly clear picture episode in which I knew I had made an irrevocable choice. I saw myself entering a cave cut into a rock formation on a bleak, windswept sea coast. What I found in the cave was a large and very old parchment scroll. Its ends were attached to heavy gold-tipped poles, and the scroll was wrapped around them so that they met in the middle of the scroll and were tied tightly together. I managed to untie the ends and open the scroll just enough to reveal the center panel, on which 2 words were written: God is. Then I unrolled the scroll all the way, and as I did so, tiny letters began to appear on both sides of the panel. The silent voice, which I had heard before, explained the situation mentally to me. If you look at the left side, you will be able to read the past, said the voice. If you look at the right side, you will be able to read the future. But I hesitated only a moment before rolling up the scroll sufficiently to conceal everything except the center panel. I am not interested in reading the past or the future, I said with finality. I will just stop with this. The voice sounded both reassured and reassuring. You made it that time, it said. Thank you. And that, it seemed, was that.
Helen prided herself as a research psychologist, not as someone who heard voices, who had heightened visual imagery, who experienced all of these psychic events that occurred throughout the summer of '65. It was extremely distressing to her. She kept feeling that maybe she was losing her mind. Certainly she couldn't reconcile all of this activity with her scientific predilections. And this became a particularly acute problem for her as the summer and early fall began. One night she called me, and this was in October, and said, you know, that inner voice refuses to go away. It keeps saying, this is a course in miracles, please take notes. What shall I do? Suppose it's crazy, suppose it doesn't make any sense, you know, suppose it's flipped. And she was obviously going through a great deal of anguish and agony at that point. Well, I said the only obvious thing, why don't you take down whatever it is, you can read it to me tomorrow morning in the office, and if it doesn't make any sense, no one else ever has to know about it. But at least we'll know what it is. So that's what we did. The next morning, Helen came in, and as she read that beautiful introduction to the text, which says, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. It was obvious that we were tuning in to something that could hardly be regarded as crazy, no matter how unexpected it was.
A major contribution of miracles is their strength in releasing you from your false sense of isolation, deprivation, and lack. A miracle is never lost. It may touch many people you have not even met, and produce undreamed of changes in situations of which you are not even aware. Miracles are natural signs of forgiveness. Through miracles, you accept God's forgiveness by extending it to others. I would feel the writing coming on almost daily, and sometimes several times a day. Evenings turned out to be a favorite time for dictation. I objected bitterly to this and often went to bed defiantly without writing anything. But I could not sleep. Eventually, I got up in some disgust and wrote as directed. I never knew when I started a sentence how it would end, and the ideas came so quickly that I had trouble keeping up with them.
Helen could turn it on or off at any time. She could stop in the middle of a sentence without even going back to reread what she had written and continue when she had a moment. She could have a research conference in mid-sentence. It made no difference at all. The flow of the material continued without any altered state. Helen at no time was in a trance or anything remotely resembling a trance. But as I read the material, I recognized that Helen in no way could have written this material. It was totally alien to her background, to her interests, and her mode of conceptualizing abstract ideas, that there's no way she could have done this.
Where did the writing come from? I did not understand the calm but impressive authority with which the voice dictated. It is largely because of the strangely compelling nature of this authority that I have referred to the voice with a capital V. At several points in the writing, the voice itself speaks in no uncertain terms about the author, Jesus. My own reactions to these references, which literally stunned me at the time, have decreased in intensity and are now at a level of wonder and acceptance. The name of Jesus Christ as such is but a symbol, but it stands for love that is not of this world. This course comes from him because his words have reached you in a language you can love and understand. The name of Jesus is the name of one who was a man, but saw the face of Christ in all his brothers and remembered God. Is he the Christ? Oh, yes, along with you.
The first part of the material that we worked on lasted for almost 3 years and ended up as a 622-page volume. When the text was finished, Helen felt, as I did, that that was the completion of our assignment and that we had plenty to do to simply try to learn those concepts and apply them in our lives. However, after a period of perhaps 9 months, Helen got increasingly restless. Then one day, she began to take down the workbook for students, which consists of 365 lessons, one for each day of the year. And that was the beginning of the second part of the course. That took approximately 2.5 years, and at the end of that, we again thought that we were finished. And after a number of months, again, of not being quite sure what would happen next, the third and final volume was announced as the Manual for Teachers. So the total period of time was approximately 7 years from the time we began with the text, including the workbook, and finally the Manual for Teachers.
I first met Helen and Bill in the fall of '72, and then I saw the course for the first time in May of '73. And then after, we spent a great deal of time together. And I think what impressed me first about Helen and Bill was, despite all the conflict that they had with each other and their difficulties with the course or resistances to the course, that was an underlying commitment that they both had made to see to it that the purity of the course and its message would never be changed and would always remain pure. And I think that always was extremely impressive to me. Helen and I spent a great deal of time together. We had dinner almost every night, she, her husband Louis, and myself. And we spent a great deal of time going over the manuscript, making sure that in its published form, it would be exactly the way Jesus wanted it. And Helen herself was an extraordinary woman. She would go from moments of real kind of otherworldliness, where her whole face would change, and she would tell me afterwards that in those moments she was like beyond even Jesus, beyond the relationship with him, beyond hearing his voice. It was like being in the presence almost of an ageless, timeless wisdom. And then within seconds, she'd go right back down worrying about where her husband was, how come he was late for supper, and concerned about all mundane things.
I was teaching at New York University in 1975 and feeling full up with an exciting career in what we then called experimental parapsychology or consciousness research, meeting very interesting people, traveling, speaking, and I was feeling a sort of emptiness. I didn't know why. One night I locked myself in the bathroom in my home and I went to pieces. I could say it was a form of surrender. I called out from the bottom of my heart, "Won't someone up there please help me?" And I meant it. Within a very short time, I received the help I sought, but not in the form I anticipated. A few days after, I was asked by a good friend to accompany him to meet two professors of medical psychology at Columbia University School of Physicians and Surgeons. I went with him, not knowing what to expect or why the meeting, but it seemed as if I was supposed to go. And that kind of mood continued as Bill took us inside the university, where we had lunch with Bill and his associate, Helen Schuckman. I found her to be a very clever woman, very intellectual and well-spoken, quite articulate and a bit sharp, and I was intimidated. And the conversation was going in all different directions, and a little bit bemused, I found myself turning to Helen and saying to her, "You're hearing an inner voice, aren't you?" And I didn't really know what I meant. But she seemed quite startled, and she said, "I beg your pardon." And Bill tried to soothe the situation. He said, "Well, Helen, let's go back to our office and let's talk about this in private." And the two of them took me back to their office and closed the door. And she handed me the text with its introduction. And I took it from her, and I put it on my lap as the others were talking among themselves. And I looked down at it. I opened up the black binder, and I turned to the introduction, and I read, "This is a Course in Miracles. It's a required course." And there was no question in my mind that I was being given a miracle and that I had asked for it.
In New York, Judith Scutch-Whitson spent a great deal of time with Helen Schuckman, and she quickly recognized the profound importance of the Course. This became a turning point in Judith's life, and she soon helped establish the nonprofit Foundation for Inner Peace and found a way to publish the Course.
Tolerance for pain may be high, but it is not without limit. Eventually, everyone begins to recognize, however dimly, that there must be a better way. As this recognition becomes more firmly established, it becomes a turning point. This ultimately reawakens spiritual vision.
I can't even imagine what my life would have been if I had not found A Course in Miracles. When I first picked it up at my apartment, I started reading it voraciously. Then it was really time for me. And I felt, as so many people have said, that I had come home. What I didn't have that A Course in Miracles gave me is a deep sense that faith in God is inseparable from faith in other people. And that's what it means to me in my life. It is a continuous reminder that my temptation to find guilt in my brother is an attack on myself. That was what so moved me the first day I ever read a page of the Course in Miracles, and it's the message that most moves me today.
Trials are but lessons that you failed to learn, presented once again. So where you made a faulty choice before, you now can make a better one, and thus escape all pain that what you chose before has brought to you. In every difficulty, all distress and each perplexity, Christ calls to you and gently says, "My brother, choose again.
As an actor, I've played many roles in my career, but in my life I've only played one, which is the victim. I'm always victimized by something or someone. So I decided to look for a way out and an explanation to all this. I picked up about every possible path and technique from the spiritual supermarket, and nothing worked. So 6 years ago, the course was translated into Spanish, and I picked it up and studied a little bit. And I knew there was something there. The course would teach me that victimization feelings are not a fact, but an interpretation you're putting to them. But what is more important, it would teach me I have a presence of love within me. I can call for help, which I did. And nowadays, I experience a very strong presence of love next to me. Whenever I feel victimized by something or someone, I can call for help. And he teaches me it's not an attack, but just the silly things we do to each other when we are afraid. We are all afraid. And that has changed my life, because now I'm not desperate or alone anymore, and I feel a deep sense of peace that nothing ever gave me before.
All my life, I've always felt a sense of emptiness and alienation, and I never really understood it because I've always been somewhat successful in terms of the world. And I tried to fill up this sense of emptiness through causes, through civil rights and in the peace movement. I lived in Africa in the Peace Corps for 2 years, and then I got a PhD, and I traveled all over the world. And each one of these experiences actually was a disappointment because it just didn't do what I thought it would do for me. About 9 years ago, I was working with people with AIDS, and I loved the work. It was very challenging and intense. But one day I began to realize that I couldn't continue giving hope to my clients because I felt hopeless myself. And I just said there must be a better way. Soon after that, I found the Course in Miracles, and it wasn't at all what I thought it would be. But it really taught me that I do have an inner teacher inside me, and I don't have to go to things outside to fill that need and that emptiness, and I don't have to use people to meet my needs. I've also seen that relationships with people in my family and my friends and my whole purpose toward work, which is a university professor, has changed because all of these are used as a classroom to get closer to the love of God. I think that the most important thing the Course has taught me is that I no longer have a sense of hopelessness.
I see in my own life a tremendous growth, especially over the last few years as I've been studying the Course in Miracles, that I've come to a point that I am at least able to see the baggage I'm dragging behind me, and realizing that it's my choice to release that, and that in releasing those illusions, and they are illusions because the past is over, it can touch us not, and the future is not, nothing exists but the present now, this holy instant now. And once one gets that, there's just a tremendous power because you are defenseless. There is no need to feel vulnerable to the world that you're joined with. And it's a wonderful healing process, and I think when we mirror that to each other, it's non-stoppable.
Part of my work as a clinician in this county was consulting with oncologists with children who had very serious illness and were dying. And I noted that many of these children oftentimes asked the doctor or nurse, this is way back now in 1975, about their thoughts about dying and their fears about dying. And oftentimes the nurse and the doctor would just change the subject. And it occurred to me there needed to be a place where kids could really talk and have an honest reaction. Because oftentimes those same kids would find the person who was the most honest was the woman who was scrubbing the floor. And she would give an honest response. And I gave a lecture back in New York on the prevention of cancer and talking about some of the things I was doing on a one-to-one basis, really utilizing Course principles. And what occurred to me was I was to start, it was sort of like in my meditation on the plane coming back, I was to start a center that would make use of the Course principles that would allow me to look at death differently. And really the children would teach me these spiritual principles. And I was just to be the catalyst for setting it up. And I set it up really based on the Course principles, not saying to children, look, I have a better way of dealing with this than someone else, but I'd like your help. Can we be colleagues with each other about a different way of looking at the world? And maybe it would be possible if you got together with other children and could talk with them about their problems, you could end up helping each other far better than doctors and nurses and teachers. And so we started in that way. The name Center of Attitudinal Healing actually makes use of many of the principles of the Course in Miracles, because what is attitudinal healing except letting go of the negative thoughts of fear and anger and attack thoughts and having them be replaced with love that's always been there. So this is what really attitudinal healing is all about. I began going around talking about love and God, some things that we don't talk about in medical school. But the majority of doctors, they became very skeptical, very concerned, very wondrous. But what happened was that the families that we were seeing, children who had catastrophic illness, that there was such rapid shifts in their feelings. Their whole family structure had changed so rapidly that these very physicians that were very skeptical began to refer people to us. And one of the things that's been helpful to me is a quote from the Course that says, "I'm not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me. The peace of God is everything that I want. The peace of God is my one goal, the aim of all my living here, the end I seek, my purpose, my function, and my life, while I abide where I'm not at home." And children at the center have really been greatly helpful to me at taking another look at the body and seeing the difference between life and death. One child who had sickle cell anemia named Kerry, I was asking him about what he thought about death. He'd come close to death many times. He said, "Well, Jerry, I think what happens when you die is that God has really created a library, and you're a book in his library. And what he does is he loans this book to your parents, and it's on a loan basis. And when the due date is up, that book comes back into God's heart. So you're never really separate from God. And when your time's up, you just go home to the heart of God." And I thought, wow, what a beautiful way of looking at it.
I came to UC Berkeley around 1967. It was very turbulent years at the school, a lot of racial strife. And around 1968, 69, I took a lot of courses in sociology, psychology, political science. And the theme in all of them was blacks were poor, blacks were deprived, blacks were, the wretched of society. I began to look at life, the society with anger and frustration. And around that same time, there was a group of people called themselves the Nation of Islam. And it basically taught black supremacy. And I lived this doctrine. I ate it. I slept it. I didn't really socialize with whites for 7 years. So I went over to JFK, and this is the very first, I hadn't been on the campus or in a white environment for 7 years. There was a lady there named Judy Scutch, and she was introducing a set of books titled A Course in Miracles. And when Judy read this introduction, I had this experience that I hadn't experienced since I was a child. I was one with everything in the room. I felt totally at peace. And something deep inside of me said, this is a tool for you. Use it.
When I first read in A Course in Miracles, the ideas that our home is in God's presence, that we are spirit and not the body, that we have been created as one with each other and our source, I just knew it was true. I'd had the experience. I didn't need validation of the experience to know it was true, but I did need an intellectual system to help me apply it. And that's what I first noticed about the Course, that I could start with a lesson a day to start to unlearn the mistakes that had been programmed into my mind, that I could remember more clearly that indeed I am spirit. And in that sense, I'm at home and totally safe. I don't have to go any place to find safety. I don't have to be anyone different. I just have to remember who I am.
Nothing outside changed, but what's inside began to change. I began to see the love that was there from human to human. I began to experience that. I began to get new friends who were that didn't just look like me, who were white, who were Hispanic, or color was not an issue in my relationships. I began to see that all men are created equal. And unless we see that, we're not going to experience peace. I began to see that anytime I see myself as being above another human being or below another human being, I'm not going to experience peace.
Two of my favorite quotes from the Course are two lessons. number 134, which is if I defend myself, I am attacked, and the other is 185 or 285, which is my mind can change all thoughts that hurt. These I have found of tremendous practical value in going through life. And I've also found that in dealing with other people, and especially when we go into the prisons and deal with people who are in prison, that these two lessons are very pragmatic, very practical, and are of tremendous value to those people who have found themselves in that situation.
The Course started letting me get peace, letting me relax, and I started experimenting with the lessons that I was picking up and trying them out on people, and I started getting real warmth and closeness and in touch with people. When they hurt, I hurt. Not out of sympathy, but out of empathy. I could understand more clearly, having experienced the pain and the degradations and the things that go on in prison, and not pointing fingers at that's their fault. You know, they did that to me. Society did that to me. The jury did that to me. The judge did that. I was real clear now that, you know, I did that to me. And I allowed myself to become unconnected. I allowed myself to be unloving and unavailable and resentful and bitter and things like that. Once I got that, then it was real clear that it was okay to tell somebody that, you know what, I love you, and be in prison at the same time.
What the Course does for a lot of people is to get them to know and recognize almost instantly that they are not acting the way they want to, and they can change their minds because they are aware of that. And that is as much of a help as anything, because it stops you from going in a direction that you inherently really don't want to do. You don't want to be conflicted. Nobody wants to be conflicted. They want to be loving, and they want to love. And if it stops you from being conflicted, which is what it does for an awful lot of people who study this Course.
A lot of the Course is about living in the world in a different way. Also, a lot of it's about guilt. Two of the things, obviously, that cause the greatest degree of guilt in all of us here are sex and money. And while the Course takes positions on nothing, the Course is not a system of behavior. The Course is a system in mind changing. Really, I think what it has taught me regarding those two subjects is that sex and money are neutral things in which I invest my meaning. Like everything else in the world, the body, the world itself, sex, money, whatever else it would happen to be, each thing only has the meaning that my mind gives it. If I make sex a very important thing to me and make it something that I need, I'm giving power to sex that sex doesn't have. If I make money something very important to me, which I did for a good portion of my life, then I make money something that it really isn't. And I think the easiest way to say it is this. The Course in Miracles teaches you to live in the moment. In order to live in the moment, you have to do a couple of things. You must forgive so that you can trust. You must have no defenses so you don't feel that you're going to be attacked. But assuming that you can go through the sequence of no defenses, forgiveness of your brother for what he didn't do to you, and then trust, and you can live in the moment, then all those things become meaningless. Money becomes meaningless because living in the moment is the whole point. Money is a future-oriented thing. Sex becomes something that you do or you don't do. If it's there and you should do it, you do it. If it's not there and you don't do it, you don't do it. It doesn't become something that's more important than it should be. And unfortunately for us, way back for the story of Genesis on through the world, sex has become something that's almost like the serpent. We should hate the serpent. We should hate sex. We should feel guilty when we have sex. We should feel guilty if we have too much money. We should feel guilty if we have too little money. That's kind of absurd. So I think what the Course has taught me to do is to take one step back from those emotion-ridden things and recognize that the emotion that's in there, I put in there, and I can subtract it out. And then in doing so, I can see it in balance. And I think if there's anything that the Course would teach us over a long period of time is to become in balance.
I encountered A Course in Miracles at a very critical time in my life when I was chief of the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Division of the Library of Congress and had 150 professional men and women working for me and for the Congress to clarify major issues of defense policy and foreign policy. And it was a very rich and full life, a very useful career, you might say, as far as informing Congress about different ways of looking at foreign and defense policy issues. But unfortunately, at precisely the time when, from an outsider's perception of me, my life seemed to be most useful, it had the least meaning. Several quotations became my guide, and I guess, in a sense, the one that was most startling for me was the quotation, "Do not seek to change the world, instead change your mind about it." Now, given the fact that my entire professional life had been dedicated to leaving the world a better place, in effect to changing some of the things that I thought were wrong with the world, and my technique for doing that was to try to understand economics, politics, strategy, psychology, sociology, the Chinese language. I had a great deal of education that aimed at being more useful. And yet as time went on, I became very clear that, as they say in Washington, where I stand on an issue depends on where I sit. So when I read this first quote in the course, it was something that, as people say in California, really resonated with me. It sounded true.
The journey to God is merely the reawakening of the knowledge of where you are always and what you are forever. It is a journey without distance to a goal that has never changed. You dwell not here, but in eternity. You travel but in dreams, while safe at home.
I think it is the vision of universal innocence that makes the Course in Miracles attract so many people. That's not an easy spirituality, by the way. It's not an easy spirituality at all. It merely is a message that until and unless we are willing to see the innocence in others and ourselves, we cannot experience the peace of God. The Course in Miracles says that heaven is not a condition or a place, but an awareness of our oneness. And we are one in our innocence. Obviously, the way that we err, the ways that we make mistakes are different. Your mistakes are different than my mistakes, but your innocence is the same as my innocence.
You have but two emotions, love and fear. One you made and one was given you. Each is a way of seeing, and different worlds arise from their different sights. See the love of God in you, and you will see it everywhere. Because it is everywhere. With love in you, you have no need except to extend it.
The Course is predicated on two belief systems. One is real, the other is false. The false belief system is one the ego adheres to, and that is that we're born into this world in physical bodies, in a world that is real with physical, and things happen to us, and sometimes we experience happiness, once in a while joy, very often depression and anxiety, certainly disease, and always death. And that's the system of thought that the ego loves, the ego adheres to, the ego exalts, and the ego wants us to believe in. On the other hand, there's the belief system that God is our reality. We are created in God's image as spirit, not the physical body, that we are love, that a property of love is light, and that we are eternal. We cannot be hurt. We're inviolate. We can't be destroyed. When one puts it that way, who but an insane person would want to choose the ego?
One of the things I've learned from working with clients in psychotherapy is that they tend to get better when they take responsibility for their experience. And the Course speaks to this very directly. It says simply, I am responsible for what I see. I choose the feelings that I experience, and I decide upon the goal I would achieve. And everything that seems to happen to me, I ask for and receive as I have asked. Now, that's quite a challenge if we're going to accept that at face value. But in fact, it gives us a sense of direction. It points out to us that we need to take responsibility for the feelings we have, and that if I'm angry, at some level that's a choice. It may be out of defensiveness, it may be out of fear, but that basically I can choose whether I want to release that anger, to work it through and move on, or whether I want to remain stuck in it, so to speak. And I think that's sometimes a problem, because in psychotherapy we often emphasize the importance of expressing anger, but we forget that that's not an endpoint. When a person feels like a victim, it may be very appropriate for them to get angry about it, but it's also appropriate for them to release that and to move on, so that in order to get in touch with our creativity, to be truly creative rather than reactive in our lives, we need to get beyond the position of victim and the position of adversary and angry reactivity into a more creative view of what's possible in our lives.
You may believe that you are responsible for what you do, but not for what you think. The truth is that you are responsible for what you think, because it is only at this level that you can exercise choice. What you do comes from what you think. Do not try to look beyond yourself for truth, for truth can only be within you.
My interest in the Course in Miracles began some years ago when I was doing research at the University of California on meditation and different schools of religion. And someone showed me a copy of the Course, and I reacted with great skepticism and refused to look at it for a couple of years, until when I finally did, I was quite surprised and surprisingly impressed, particularly by two things. One was that I found there was a psychological system within it which was very sophisticated and on a par in many ways with some contemporary thinking in Western psychology. And the second thing that surprised and impressed me was that it became clear that this seemed to represent an example of the underlying perennial wisdom which seems to lie at the core of the world's great religions.
The Course was intended for self-study, and it has been translated into many languages by the Foundation. But it is here, in Roscoe, New York, at the Foundation for A Course in Miracles, that co-founders Kenneth and Gloria Wapnick offer classes for students who desire to pursue the Course in depth.
It's called the Course in Miracles because it's the miracle that is the central process whereby our minds are healed. The Course teaches us that the problem is that we've forgotten that we even have a mind. And so there's like a veil of amnesia which has fallen across us. And we live in this world, living our lives as Thoreau said, in quiet desperation, never really knowing what the problem is. So we live lives of pain, of suffering, of love and hate, of ups and downs. But never knowing that the source of all of our problems lies in a choice that our mind has made. And what the miracle does is restore to our mind the awareness that, number one, we do have a mind, and that within this mind is the power of choice. So where before we had chosen the ego thought system of attack and guilt and fear, now we could choose the thought system of the Holy Spirit and learn how to forgive and how to love. The central concept of A Course in Miracles is forgiveness. And there's a beautiful line which really summarizes this, that says, the holiest spot on all the earth is where an ancient hatred has become a present love. That the holiest spot on earth is not a place, it is not a church, it is not a shrine. It's the altar within our minds when we choose finally to forgive somebody against whom we've held a terrible grievance. And by asking Jesus for help, we're able to shift the way that we see this person. And so instead of his becoming an ancient enemy, he now suddenly becomes our friend and our brother and our companion back home.
I think the Course is so important because it has a different type of spirituality than other paths, because you don't have to leave the world or your situation or your family or your job. You can stay right put where you are and practice the Course. You don't have to go off to a mountain or an ashram or a monastery. Because the main teaching of the Course is forgiveness. And so you practice these lessons of forgiveness as you go along with the Course, day by day, minute by minute, in your life, in your job, in your family. And you have, as the Course teaches us, a right mind, where there is a correction for each wrong-minded thought of the ego thought system. And so as I'm going through my day and I feel myself getting upset and angry, I have an internal teacher that the Course says is either Jesus or the Holy Spirit, and I can ask for help. And in that instant, I can shift my perception, and that's what the Course calls a miracle. And I can have that anger changed to a new perception and let it go through this process that the Course calls forgiveness.
When I started to read A Course in Miracles and recognized that to forgive is to overlook, that selective remembering helped in the process of forgiveness. To choose only the thoughts of love and forget those of aggression, fear, denial, anger. That in that attitude, based upon a spiritual concept, that we are not our bodies, but we are in truth spirit. At that point, I could understand what the Course meant when it said, to forgive is not to condone, it's not to make error real, but rather to recognize that what you thought someone has done to you has never in truth occurred. Has never in truth occurred. It was so startling to me because of course it occurs. We see it every day. We experience it every moment. But in truth, it's saying, in the metaphysical reality, in the spiritual truth, in God's world, it has not occurred. Only by shifting our thought from the ego's thought system to that of God can we dare to accomplish forgiveness. That's the bad news. The good news is we have a friend, the voice within us, the eternal forgiver, the higher guide, the higher self, anything we choose to call it. And it's that great transformer within that helps in the process of forgiving. So it became then very, very specific, the guidelines I was given for forgiveness. Number one, recognize I had a problem, that I wasn't feeling peaceful, and that I was holding a negative feeling about someone. Recognize it, bring it to the surface, confront it. All within myself, of course. And the second, recognize that I wanted peace, that I really wanted to see it differently, that I wanted to change my mind. I didn't want to hold this grudge, this grievance any longer. Number three, know that I couldn't accomplish this by myself, meaning my small self, my ego self. Number four, turn it over to the higher self. Say, take this mess, I can't handle it. I really surrender it to you. I ask you to take it from me and to show me what true vision is. Now, when that happens, one can be sure that the situation is transformed, that one does see with different eyes. I call it realize. I begin to realize what that other human being is to me, more than a brother or a sister, more than a friend. That person is myself. In that sense, I am not my brother's keeper. I am that other. No one can do anything to one's self when one is looking at the world through one's higher self. And that becomes a system of such safety and protection that it has great dividends.
The Course has a very unusual way of defining forgiveness, and that is that you forgive your brother for what he has not done, not for what he has done, which is the usual way of looking at forgiveness. And what that means on one very important level is that what I accuse you of, what I hold against you, is that it's because of you that I no longer experience the love or the peace of God. that before you came into my life and before you said or did this awful thing, I felt wonderful, and now all of a sudden my life has crumbled and it's your fault. And what the Course helps us to understand, on the other hand, is that there's no one and nothing in this world that has the power to take God's peace away from me, except my own mind if I choose to see myself as separate from it. And so therefore, what I forgive you for is that you have not taken the peace of God away from me. Right? Instead, what I have to do is to forgive myself, because it was my mistaken choice that caused me all the pain, and not something you have done. And what allows us to do this is the role of Jesus or the Holy Spirit. That basically what Jesus says to us in our minds is, take my hand, use my eyes, and look at your brother the way that I see him. And then you see that this person is just like you. He shares the same insanity you do. He's part of the same faulty thought system that you are part of. And that he also yearns as you do to return home. And so rather than seeing my brother or my sister as separate and different from me, I see them as people walking along the same road back to heaven as I am. And it's the love of Jesus which really helps us make that shift.
What could you want forgiveness cannot give? Do you want peace? Forgiveness offers it. Do you want happiness? A quiet mind? A certainty of purpose? And a sense of worth and beauty that transcends the world? Do you want care and safety and the warmth of sure protection always? All of this forgiveness offers you. Forgive the world, and you will understand that everything that God created cannot have an end. And nothing He did not create is real. In this one sentence is our course explained.
There certainly does appear to be a spiritual awakening going on in our age. Certainly if you contrast the 90s with the 40s and 50s, when I grew up, things are certainly much different. God is no longer a dirty word. Angels are spoken about freely. Miracles are talked about. And I certainly feel that the Course is like an integral part of that new movement. And in that light, I think it's extremely important to mention something that the Course says of itself at the beginning of the Teacher's Manual, and that is that it's not the only spiritual path. In fact, it says that it's only one path among many thousands of the universal course. And I think that that's extremely important to mention, so that people don't believe that the Course is just another dogmatic set of teachings and that we're seeing the birth of a new church. And Jesus in the Course says also that He's not the only person who was awakened from the dream, and that He's not the only helper, that there are dozens and dozens and dozens. But He is one major symbol for us in the Western world, and A Course in Miracles, I think, He's a major expression of His teachings to all of us.
Beyond the body, beyond the sun and stars, past everything you see and yet somehow familiar, is an arc of golden light that stretches as you look into a great and shining circle. And all the circle fills with light before your eyes. The edges of the circle disappear, and what is in it is no longer contained at all. The light expands and covers everything, extending to infinity, forever shining and with no break or limit anywhere. Within it, everything is joined in perfect continuity. Nor is it possible to imagine that anything could be outside. For there is nowhere that this light is not. What is a miracle but this remembering? And who is there in whom this memory lies not? The light in one awakens it in all. And when you see it in your brother, you are remembering for everyone.